Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm your session moderator, Raya Samet, and I have a few housekeeping items to share with you before we get started. First, we ask that you keep your microphone on mute until you need to ask a question. You can ask your questions at any time by entering them into the chat panel. We'll be saving all of the questions until the end of the presentation. Second, a reminder that we are recording this session. And lastly, closed captioning and a live transcript is available throughout the session. Today's presentation is called Let's Hear It from Our Students, an analysis of OER feedback survey. And your presenters are Jason Almarigi and Regina Gong. So without further ado, let me turn it over to them.
Thank you, Raya, and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending our presentation today. And I hope you enjoyed or are enjoying the summit so far. So I will have a moment here because I will be sharing our screen. So okay, let me just situate it here. Okay, so thank you again. And my name is Regina Gong. Oops. My name is Regina Gong. I am the OER and Student Success Librarian at Michigan State University. That is my email. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, that is my handle at drgong. In my capacity as OER and Student Success Librarian, I lead the OER program at MSU and the OER award program as well. And I also manage our MSU Libraries open textbook publishing via Pressbooks, provide professional development to faculty, staff, my fellow librarians on open education and open licensing. And of late, during the past academic year and into the next academic year, I am facilitating the open pedagogy learning community as well. So I'll turn you over to Jason to introduce himself.
Everyone, my name is Jason Almarigi. I am the Director of Assessment for the College of Social Science here at Michigan State University. In that role, I support the college as well as other university level initiatives with analysis of institutional data, surveys, and anything sort of data related. Beyond that, my passion area within research is engaging youth and promoting youth voice in decision-making related to the programs and services that are offered to them. And part of that is through the evaluation process, ensuring that they're partners in that process.
Okay, so our goal for this presentation is to tell you about our OER program, a little bit about our OER program. If you were in our presentation earlier this morning, you were able to, we were able to talk about our OER program and how we have built it from the ground up. But for this presentation, we are just going to show you how our OER program has impacted our students through our student survey. Yeah, so the MSU Libraries OER program is now on its third year. We are approaching our third year. I am a full-time librarian leading the program, and so fortunate to have a really awesome team that comprises the OER team. And so we have a publishing assistant for our print-on-demand services. We are able to do that in-house in the libraries, and that's Julie Taylor. We have our own dedicated copy editor who does all the copy editing for the materials that our faculty create as part of the OER award. That's Josh Newman, and we have an accessibility coordinator who just joined us. That's Emilia. That's Chandley Marsick Taylor, And we have a student employee too assigned to the OER team, and primarily she does a lot of cover art for the open textbooks that we are publishing. And as part of the OER program, we also have an OER award program that incentivizes and provides support for our faculty as they engage in OER work. And for that, we have $50,000 annual fund to do that. So it's now in our third year. The last 2 years, though, that 50,000 came from our provost's office. And for this academic year, it's now built into the library's budget, which is really good. And also we are an institutional member of Open Education Network. So our goal for our OER program is affordability, access, and equity. And also part of that is encouraging our faculty to adapt and create OER and other free low-cost materials as course learning materials alternative, and provide the technical support and infrastructures for our instructor to engage in OER. But more importantly, and we will be discussing that in our presentation tomorrow, is to empower instructors to engage in new pedagogical models that leverages the affordances of OER and open education. So our goal is more than affordability and access, as I have already outlined in this. And a great part of our goal is examining how the use of OER has impacted our students in their overall life, as they engage with textbooks and OER, and also how it has impacted them in ways that shows the affordances or the benefits of OER. So these are the metrics that I track, right, when it comes to our OER adoptions. And this is just, very common. A lot of OER programs out there track number of courses, number of sections, number of instructors, and cost savings. And I'm not going to discuss all of these metrics, but I just want to emphasize that we go beyond, we go beyond just tracking all of this, and we really want to track impact in terms of, the life of our students. And so Jason will discuss about the study that we did when we administered our student survey in fall 2020 and spring 2021. So Jason.
So so part of this is Regina and I believe were hired in at about the same time. And I think we met during new faculty orientation. And in our conversations about our respective roles, there was this synergy about how her work and her passion in terms of the adoption of OER and changing, creating improvements in student success could dovetail with some of the data that I work with on a regular basis. And so so that partnership led to the discussion of let's do a survey and let's do this not only to just track what student experiences are with their traditional textbooks and open education resources, but perhaps to serve as a baseline set of information that we could track over time through regular surveys of students within courses that have adopted OER. And so if you could go to the next slide, Regina. So that was the primary impetus for this project. Now, one of the things that we're able to do is not only administer a survey and gather that perceptual data about experiences with traditional textbooks, but we also have access to institutional data that will allow us to look at how might differences how might experiences differ based on a student's background, whether that's related to being a first-generation college student, or whether they may come from an economic background that may be somewhat challenging, or maybe based on race, being an underrepresented minority. And we're also able to capture exactly who are the students who are enrolled in these courses through enrollment records. And then look at down the road, look at, might there be student course outcomes in terms of grades or preparation for future courses that are part of the sequence in terms of their success. And so to start this process off, we identified those courses that had adopted OER resources. I pulled from the student information system all students within those courses. And then what I did was I deduplicated that list. And so students who are enrolled in multiple OER courses wouldn't receive multiple surveys. They only received one survey at a time. And so that was our sample for recruiting students to complete the survey. And then the survey was adopted from a prior survey that Regina had used previously. And so it's a 12-item survey that assesses, and I'll talk about, actually, can you go to the next slide? Here we go. So the survey has two general frames of questions. So we ask questions about traditional textbooks in terms of what are the costs of those textbooks? What are the impacts of those costs? And are you likely to purchase and use that traditional textbook? How do you use that? How frequently? And then the second line of survey questions is related to open educational resources. So also the use of those, but then some ratings about the quality, and those ratings are compared to other courses that have a traditional textbook. And so we asked about questions related to accuracy of the information within that resource, the clarity of the information, understandability, and the ability of those questions, or of that resource, to support your learning within the course. And then ultimately ask, what is their preference? Do they prefer traditional textbooks, or do they prefer OER? And we have some both closed-ended items as well as open-ended items to assess student feedback and their voice related to open educational resources. Next slide. So there's a lot going on here. For those of you who have questions related to the statistics, I'm not going to focus on everything because I think we'll all, our eyes will glaze over. I'll highlight some things, but for those of you who are keen to statistics, if you've got questions, please use the chat feature. I will monitor that as I talk when it comes to some of these numbers, and I'll address the questions as they come up. So you can see here sort of the breakdown. So we had two implementations of the survey, and these were consecutive semesters, so fall semester of 2020 as well as spring semester of 2021. And you can see what the total student enrollment across all sections of those courses. We're talking over 8,000 students across all the sections that had access to open educational resources. Talk about duplication. So I deduplicated, and you can see what that baseline recruited sample was. That's the unduplicated sample. And then you can see all the rest of the information. The key points I want to point out here is that for fall semester, we had a total sample size of completed surveys of 1,038, which represented 13.1% of the recruitment sample. Spring semester, you can see quite a bit a different story. We only had 218 students who completed the survey out of the 7,423 that had been recruited. I just want to step in here and say this dynamic, or this differential response rates really occurred across our institution for spring semester. Both fall and spring semesters here at MSU, we were virtual. Completely virtual, outside of a few small handful of courses that I don't think were related to OER. But by the end of spring, I think there was, I don't know what we call it, perhaps it's like e-fatigue or electronic fatigue. And so we do see a complete reduction in our sample size. I can say that typically, and I did do some analysis here, this sample tends to be have a bit higher grades, not hugely different, but statistically different when you're talking about large sample sizes. It tends to be a little bit more female, tends to be a little bit more Asian in terms of proportionality. Any questions related to that sampling? Looks like I got a direct message related to a question. Again, the small sample size for spring, I really do think that there was fatigue related to electronic interfacing towards the end of that semester. Beyond that, we didn't have incentives for completing the survey. We did do reminders, and so this is not outside the realm of the proportion of students who voluntarily complete the survey. Okay, the first question beyond agreeing to participate in the survey was to describe what their purchase behavior is for traditional textbooks. And you can see the proportion there. Response rate, I believe, was how often do you purchase the required textbook? And you can see the range of options for students to reply ranged from I never purchase those textbooks to I always. And so you can see that the majority of students report that they often purchase those textbooks. But if you look at, and this is the graph to the right, if you combine the students who said that they purchased the textbooks about half the time or less, you can kind of see what that distribution is. So for all students, 40% say that they purchase their traditional textbook about half the time or less. That's a pretty significant proportion. URM refers to underrepresented minority status. And then you can see Pell eligible, which MSU uses our proxy for financial need or financial socioeconomic status. First generation, or first gen refers to first generation college student, and then international students were another point of interest here. So I'm getting some questions here. Queen Yu has posted a question. Let's see here. Did I answer that adequately in terms of the small sample size? Let's see here. How could you have changed the scope to get a larger sample size? Because yeah, so this is a great question. And the importance of the question is that, based on the small percent of students who completed the survey from the recruited percent of students, we might be biasing the results based on some sort of systematic characteristic of those students. And I did mention that typically students who perform better in courses, who are female, who come from an Asian American background, are statistically more likely to complete the survey. So we may not be representing some very important subgroups in the data here. And in order to improve that, I think there's a number of ways to do that I would recommend. One is clearly engaging the instructors of these courses to help promote the survey, and perhaps even administering the survey within the course. The survey is conducted online through Qualtrics, but we could implement a paper-based survey, which may, in that regard, we'd probably capture quite a higher proportion of students. We could incentivize students to complete it through a raffle or a nominal honorarium for completing the survey. Typically, based on the sheer volume of students that we have, as I mentioned, over 7,000 students were in our recruitment sample. It gets a little bit pricey, and so you have to do the balance of cost versus benefits. So it is important to keep these statistics in mind that there may be some systematic bias to them. So next slide. We then asked students about how does the cost of traditional textbooks affect you? And we just wanted to sample a couple different response options. And then we did ask an open-ended if there are other ways. And so we wanted to start off kind of student-friendly in terms of the voice. So we asked, how often do your required textbooks annoy you? Or do the costs stress you out? And you can see the proportion of students who endorse that particular statement. We also asked about, did the cost of textbooks ever prevent you from actually buying the book because you couldn't afford the book? And then similarly, did you have to make cuts or limitations to non-necessary expenses? These are things like entertainment, games, and the like. And then finally, we asked about, did you ever have to make cuts or limits to necessary expenses or pay bills late? And so these are things like utilities, rent, healthcare, and the like. And so you can see that proportion that about a quarter of our students indicate that the cost of traditional textbooks have caused them to cut back on necessary living expenses. And only 2.9% of our students did not endorse any of those from annoy to cutting of necessary living expenses. So a very small proportion. Next slide.
Yeah, and these are from our students. We thought we'd share with you some of the things that they told us from the open-ended question we asked them that illustrates the things that Jason has mentioned in the previous slide. So in here you can see from a math, this is math 314 student. He is international and male. Thank you so much for not forcing us to pay for a textbook we rarely use. Most of my classes ask me to pay over $100 each on a textbook written by the professor. It's outrageous. And this one is from an Asian male. This is an STT 200 student. Screw every corrupt textbook manufacturer and MSU for enabling them. Make every textbook online and free. And this one too is from a white male. This is our Psych 101 student. So that's the intro to psychology. I'm not gonna read all of this, but just the ones in bigger font. One of the most annoying parts of undergraduate education is that virtually all courses state that textbooks are required, yet the majority of these courses never actually use the textbook, or the book is unnecessary to get an A in the course. So yeah, we thought, and to what Jason has mentioned, we are able to dig deep into the profile of the students who have taken the survey just because we have access to their data. Yeah, and Jason.
So you can see here the full text of that question that had asked about making cuts to your required or necessary living expenses. And so, but I wanted to point out that the cost of required textbooks do not have an equal impact across different student groups. And so you can see across all students, as I mentioned before, 25%, or about a quarter, 23.5%, indicated that they had to make cuts to or limits to their necessary living expenses. But when you look at different subgroups, underrepresented minority, that proportion jumps up about 10%. Students who come from lower SES backgrounds are even higher in terms of that impact. First generation also elevated, and then international students do tend to show a lower proportion that are impacted by the cost of textbooks. And I think that typically is related to our price point at MSU for international students is quite high, and so we may not be, they may be coming from higher financial backgrounds. Next slide. Okay.
Yeah. And again, these are some of the quotes that speaks to the previous slide that Jason mentioned about cost impact. And this is from a Hispanic female first generation Pell eligible student. Overall, they have a good experience with this book. It helped me understand the concepts I had been learning in class, and it reduced my stress of being able to buy so many books for the semester, especially since I did not have the money around that time to buy actual textbooks. So it really helped this semester. And this is from, this is chemistry 141 student, Asian and female. And this, we have heard this very frequently from our students. College is already expensive. People shouldn't have to choose between buying food for the week or getting a textbook. And then this is from an ISS 210 student, African-American female, who really appreciate OER structured classes, and it makes the cost of living seem bearable. And more voices from our student. And this one is from an African-American female first gen Pell eligible student. Not having to pay for one more book really relieves stress. I didn't have to worry about trying to work overtime, so I can stay on track with all my bills. And lastly, this is from a chemistry 251 student, white and female. I switched out of a section of a class for next semester to a different section, in all caps, specifically because my new section would have an OER textbook. It is extremely helpful to not have to worry about spending $100 on a textbook. I wish more classes did this.
So we have some more survey results here. So one of the things that we wanted to ask was, how do students use their textbooks, their open educational resource? Do they print it, have the entire resource printed? Do they print out particular pages? Do they electronically copy and paste sections of the resource into a separate document or a study guide? And so you can see the proportion of students here who endorsed each of those questions. So about 10% indicated that for their OER resource in that course, they had it, the entire thing printed out. About 15% indicated that they had printed themselves particular chapters or pages. And then nearly a third indicated that they had copied and pasted some of the elements into a study guide. I do want to say there might be a quote here, but one of the things that we really did hear from students about the real benefit of OER resources was that the flexibility in managing the information within it, or using the search function through the resource, so they can very quickly find a key term or a page, or the ability to copy and paste or highlight directly within the particular resource. And so next slide. We then asked about the quality of the OER resource. And so we asked them to what extent that the textbook or the resource was, the information was presented accurately, it was presented in a clear and understandable way, and then whether or not it supported the learning in their course. And the response range was from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And so what I'm showing here is just the proportion of students who either agreed or strongly agreed with each of those statements. And you can see the vast majority of students indicated that that the quality of their OER resource was accurate, understandable, and supportive of their learning. Next slide. And then we wanted to do ask students about sort of a comparator of compared to the textbooks of their other courses, their traditional textbooks, how would they rate their OER textbook or resource? And you can see in the left chart here that the vast majority of students indicated that that the resource was either about the same as their other textbooks or better. And so just over a third of students indicated that their OER resource was better than their traditional textbooks. And then when we posed a scenario where if a student had a choice of two sections that were equivalent in all elements except for the textbook or OER resource, which would they choose? And you can see nearly 60% indicated that they would choose the course with the OER resource. And about a quarter indicated that they didn't have a preference.
Yeah, and these are some of the quotes that speaks to our students' perceptions of quality, traditional versus OER. Chem 1 for one student, white female, love this book, so helpful and well written. And this one is from an SDT 200 student. I really enjoyed the fact that it was very comprehensible and organized very well. I use it every day when logging into my SDT course, and I relied on it to get all my info from. This one is Intro to Chemistry student, an Asian male, first generation. The quality of this textbook is just as good, if not better, than the ones in my other classes. And this one too, from a female underrepresented minority Pell eligible student. I really appreciate that this course uses an OER. Textbooks, as we know, are incredibly expensive and often useless to me. So not having the additional cost of one for this course was very beneficial. And I felt as if I was getting the same quality education as I would have had they chosen to go, as I would had they chosen to go with the textbook I had to buy.
So Regina, I wonder if we should take some time to field some questions.
Sure.
I don't know if we can open it up to for other folks to speak, or am I deviating from the protocol?
They will, it's either they put their questions in the chat, or at the end of our presentation, we can all talk about it. So yeah, I suggest we go on.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think this for our additional analysis, right? So so these are more of our quantitative analysis regarding the impact of textbook costs. Jason?
Sure. I'm wondering if we maybe just skim through this. As I've talked about this a bit, and so you can see we ran some statistical analyses, and we for Pell eligible students, we did find some statistical differences in terms of Pell eligible versus students who are not eligible for Pell Grant assistance across all of the those impact variables, except for the annoyance one, which there was a slight slightly higher proportion of students who are not Pell eligible who were annoyed by the cost of textbooks. Next slide. And then in terms of textbook usage, so this is a graph showing a set of analyses compared. So we did ask how frequently do you use your textbook, your traditional textbook versus your OER resource. And you can see that the proportions here do shift, that OER resources are used, and these aren't statistical. Well, overall there's a statistical difference, but slightly OER resources are used slightly more often than traditional textbooks. And then let's see here. And then I've already talked about the overall quality, so we can skip this. We've got some more quotes here.
And this one just speaks to what our students say about the quality, as Jason already mentioned, you know, the ability to control F, copy and paste, and just view interactive elements of the open textbook.
And then I've gone through these results already.
Yeah, and this one speaks to the last question that we asked in our survey. So do you have any additional comments? And the comments that our students told us, we analyzed it and came up with the themes, you know, regarding the comments that they gave us. So most of it has to do, of course, with affordability. And as we mentioned earlier, the ability to access the enhanced features of the digital materials. So aside from the ways in which they can do all those enhanced features within, you know, their preferred devices, they also have access to interactive quizzes that our faculty has used, specifically H5P, that are embedded in the open textbooks. So, you know, easy access, day one access, convenience and ease of use, and enhanced learning. And these are just some of the comments that they told us. It's a lot, so I will just going to skim. And these are the comments that speaks to the theme of ability to access the enhanced features of the digital materials. Access. It's really amazing how our students are really finding that it is accessible, but it also is conforms to accessibility standards, because we are very big on ensuring that the materials we create and we produce as part of the OER program are all accessible. And then, of course, convenience and ease of use, enhanced learning, overall good experience with the book. They really like the interactives because they help them learn the material easier and makes it more interesting.
So I know we've just powered through several text-laden slides. And so what I wanted to offer here was just sort of a quick graphic as to how the themes laid out. And so we identified three big themes, one related to cost, one related to quality and utility. And so you can see that's related to costs. There was impact on their living expenses, the cost of traditional textbooks. We heard a lot about stress. And then there were several students who really focused on the ethics of why do textbooks cost so much money, especially relevant to related to the cost of attending the university overall, and as well as instructors who require books that they write themselves. Quality focused on elements of it being well written, the clarity of the concepts. And then one of the things, elements of OER is that the inclusion of animations and greater visuals and hyperlinks. That came out within the qualitative elements. And then the utility, those interactive quizzes and learning assessments, the universal access, they could access the resource on a computer or a handheld device. And then I have the whole Control F, which is the find feature within an electronic document. And then the Control C and Control P, of course, is the copy and paste feature. At the bottom, you see that that students who come from underrepresented minority backgrounds or who are eligible to Pell really focused on the cost, whereas students who are non-underrepresented minorities and non-Pell eligible focus on the quality and the utility of the resources. One thing I did want to point out that we did see an interesting trend in the qualitative related to the class or the level of the student. So juniors and seniors tended to focus on how they navigate whether or not they purchase or don't purchase, or the timing of the purchase of required textbooks. And we labeled this as kind of a sophisticated consumerism. Older students tend to wait and assess the extent that the required textbook will actually be used within the course, or whether it's a portion of the textbook. They will seek alternative access points to those traditional textbooks, whether those are legal or non-legal access points, or they may choose to not access the resource altogether and gamble with their grade. And they do this in a way that I believe is informed and sophisticated. And that was kind of a theme that came out, a meta theme from these open-ended comments. So, and these are just some broad stroke statements about what we've learned through this process. And I'll let you read them here in terms of, and I think a lot of these are not going to come across as big wow statements. It's more reinforcing what we know. But I think one of the things that I think has been helpful with this is our access to institutional data that allows us to dig into subgroups and how there might be differential impact, and then some of the additional open-ended elements that students contributed to our understanding. Regina, do you have additional?
Yeah, and thank you, Jason. And as you mentioned, this is not surprising, right? We've seen this in a lot of OER efficacy research that we all have read, or we might have read. You know, the impact of traditional textbook costs to our students and versus the OER. So yeah. If at all, as what Jason mentioned, it only reinforced the findings that we've gleaned from the survey. Yeah, so that's it for our presentation. We'd love to hear from you about what you think, and if you are, you know, if you have an OER program and struggling to do assessment or feedback, I would note that we will share our slides to you. We will upload it in Sketch, so you have access to that. And you know, if you want sample of the questions that we ask our students, I'd be happy to provide that as well. So really just want us to talk about either, you know, what, if you have questions with our presentation, or if you have, if you are struggling with assessing. I know I'm fortunate to have Jason in the team, and I think we forgot to mention that Jason is also part of the university-wide OER program advisory committee that I am chairing. So Jason is an important part of that committee because he has all the expertise and access to institutional data and the ability to dig in to the profiles of the students that are taking OER courses. Yeah, you can just type it in the chat or unmute yourself. Yeah, we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, does anybody have anything? Because if not, I'll jump in with one that I have on my mind, which is how frequently you intend to repeat this. I mean, obviously it's a lot to undertake a major survey, but sometimes that longitudinal data can be really valuable as well. So, you know, is this an every semester plan, or, you know, are you thinking that in order to avoid some of that survey fatigue, you might wait a little longer in between administering the survey, like just do it every other semester or every other year or something like that?
Yeah, well, we intend to do this every semester. So if at all, you know, we are learning so much as we go along. Jason and I actually talked about this a lot, like the frequency of the survey. We intentionally did not send the survey in the summer semester, just because of the way our summer semester is structured. We have a shortened summer, and we have, yeah. So hopefully we will do another one in the fall. Jason, can you add some more?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do, because since the data are identified in terms of who has completed past surveys, I think if the survey fatigue does appear to be an issue that's hampering our response rates, we can exclude those students who have previously completed an OER survey from a new sample, or perhaps think about some different type of sampling methodologies that may track specific students over time. So we're still having those conversations and assessing. Obviously, having gone from into remote learning created a brand new kind of scenario for every one of us who do assessment work. And so as we return to in-person courses, again, I think going back to Queen Yu's question about how can we improve response rates, engaging faculty more. So we'll be thinking about this a little bit more, and then also getting feedback from faculty in terms of results for their own course. And that may adjust not only the survey itself, but also the sampling.
Yeah, and maybe provide, we weren't able to provide incentives for students to take the survey just because of some bureaucratic process that we had to go through, but maybe we're able to provide like a raffle drawing, you know, for like gift certificate to Sparty's cafe to entice them into taking the course, the survey. It really is it's very short, right, Jason? It's like 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think on average it's about 2 minutes for students to complete it. And again, that's through Qualtrics. They record how much time the student spent on the survey.
Yeah.
Obviously, the students who had longer sentiments that they wanted to share in the open-ended took a little bit more time.
Yeah.
I'm looking just in case if anybody has one last question, please either unmute yourself and ask it or write it in the chat, because we're coming to the end of the session.
Yeah, and I think Raya has pasted our contact information in the chat. So if you know, questions suddenly prompt up, you know, after our presentation, feel free to reach out to Jason for more information, or myself. Yeah, and I think after this, right? Yeah, we'll have a break and student panel on student advocacy. So.
Absolutely, yes. So thank you very, very much to our presenters and to all of you for attending today. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed it. And as Regina mentioned, coming up next, we have our student panel, which we hope you'll attend as well. And later we'll have our wrap up for the day and hope you'll join us for that as well. So thank you. Hope you're enjoying the summit, and we'll see you later.